Chapter 1: The Shadow Detective. The rain beat incessantly against the grimy windows of the city, creating a melancholic rhythm that echoed through the dark and empty streets. In the dimly lit office, the shadow detective, Ethan Blackwood, sat behind his cluttered desk, surrounded by old files and empty whiskey bottles. His eyes were tired, with a countenance that spoke of having seen the worst of humanity. Ethan was a man of few words, an enigma to most. His past was as murky as the city he lived in, but his reputation as the best private detective was undeniable. Known for solving cases the police wouldn't even dream of tackling, he operated in the shadows, trusting only himself and his keen intuition. The smoke from his cigarette formed spirals in the air as he looked at an old portrait of a woman on his desk. His expression hardened, as if that moment of vulnerability had been a mistake. Before he could get lost in his memories, the office door creaked open, revealing a hooded figure. "Detective Blackwood?" The voice was low and urgent. Ethan nodded, his eyes now sharp and alert. The figure stepped in, revealing himself to be a young reporter named Jack, whose face was marked by anxiety and desperation. "I have a case for you, detective. Something big. The city needs you." Ethan observed the young man, weighing each word. He took the envelope Jack handed him and opened it, revealing disturbing photos of a crime scene. His face hardened even more upon recognizing the brutality in the images. "The police are lost. They're calling him the artist. He leaves his victims in macabre poses, as if they were twisted works of art," Jack explained, his voice trembling slightly. Ethan extinguished his cigarette, stood up, and grabbed his hat and overcoat. "Tell the police I'm on my way," he said in a voice that brooked no argument. As he stepped out to face the rainy night, the city seemed to sigh in relief. The shadow detective was back, ready to dive into the depths of darkness and bring to light the monster haunting the streets. Chapter 2: The First Crime. The city was engulfed in a heavy darkness when Ethan arrived at the crime scene. The location, a narrow and foul-smelling alley, was cordoned off with yellow tape, with a few police officers present, their flashlights barely penetrating the thick fog. The sound of rain hitting the walls and asphalt echoed grimly, amplifying the sense of desolation. In the center of the alley, illuminated only by a single flickering streetlight, lay the body of a young woman. Her pose was macabre, her arms stretched at impossible angles, as if she were dancing a grotesque dance. Her eyes were open, fixed on the sky, with an expression of eternal terror. In her hand, a black rose, a sickening touch from the killer now known as the artist. Ethan walked slowly to the body, each step echoing in the morbid silence. He crouched down, carefully examining the scene. The marks on her neck indicated strangulation, but there was something more, something ritualistic in the way the body was arranged. "Who found the body?" he asked, his voice slicing through the cold air like a blade. "One of the residents of the building next door. Called the police as soon as they saw it," answered a surly-looking officer, clearly uncomfortable with Ethan's presence. Ethan looked around, absorbing every detail, every shadow. Nothing was by chance. He knew each element had a purpose, a message the killer wanted to convey. His eyes stopped on a nearby wall, where a grotesque drawing had been made with the victim's blood, a distorted figure, dancing. "This is no ordinary crime," Ethan murmured to himself. "This is a spectacle, and he wants us to watch." The officers looked confused as Ethan stood up, his face a mask of determination. He knew this was just the beginning. The artist had more to show, more horrors to reveal. And he, the shadow detective, would be the one to decipher this macabre masterpiece. "Seal off the area and don't let anyone touch anything," Ethan ordered. "Every detail here is a clue." As he walked away from the crime scene, the rain continued to fall, washing away the blood but not the pain. Ethan knew he had to act quickly. Time was a luxury he didn't have, and the artist was just beginning his macabre show. Chapter 3: The Detective's Entrance. The day dawned with a gray sky, heavy with clouds that promised more rain. In the city center, the police headquarters was an old building, steeped in corruption and incompetence. Ethan Blackwood ascended the stone steps with determined strides, his hat pulled low over his eyes, his black overcoat swaying in the cold wind. Inside, the atmosphere was chaotic. Incessant phone calls, disorganized officers, and the smell of stale coffee filled the air. No one seemed to notice Ethan's arrival, but that didn't bother him. He was used to being ignored until things really mattered. He headed straight to the captain's office, a corpulent, sweaty figure with a cigarette dangling from his lips. The captain glanced up wearily as Ethan entered, but showed no sign of surprise. "Blackwood," said the captain, tossing a manila envelope onto the desk. "The media is all over us. We need results and fast." Ethan picked up the envelope and opened it, revealing more photos and crime reports. He glanced over them briefly before looking at the captain. "You let this happen. You let the artist feel safe. Now he's showing his art to the world," Ethan said, his voice cold as ice. "Spare me the sermon," growled the captain. "The city is on the brink of panic. Do your job and catch this bastard." Ethan left the office without another word, heading directly to the evidence room. There, he found Officer Laura Mendez, one of the few people on the force he trusted. Laura was young, but she had an unbreakable determination and a sharp mind. "Laura," he said, nodding at her, "what do we have?" Laura handed him a dossier with the collected evidence. The victim was identified as Maria Sanchez, an art student. The black rose in her hand is real, no signs of chemical tampering. And that blood painting, it looks like something a macabre artist would create. Ethan studied the photos again, his eyes fixed on the details of the painting. Something about it seemed familiar, as if the artist was sending a message directly to him. "He's taunting us," Ethan said. "He wants us to follow his clues, wants us to dance to his tune." Laura frowned. "So, where do we start?" Ethan smiled slightly, a rare expression on his somber face. "With the past. The artist didn't appear out of nowhere. Someone knows him, and someone will talk." He turned, already mapping out the path ahead in his mind. The city was in panic, but Ethan Blackwood was at home in the chaos. He would dive into the deepest shadows to find the truth, and nothing would stop him. Chapter 4: Clues and Suspects. The rain showed no signs of letting up as Ethan and Laura headed to Maria Sanchez's apartment, the first victim of the artist. The narrow, dark streets reflected the streetlights, creating dancing shadows that looked like zombies wandering the city. Maria's building was old, with worn bricks and a staircase that creaked with every step. Entering the apartment, a smell of mold and disuse greeted them. Ethan scrutinized every detail of the small space, looking for anything that might reveal more about Maria's life. Art books and magazines were scattered across the room, along with several blank canvases and brushes. It seemed like the home of someone passionate about creating, someone with interrupted dreams. "Look at this," Laura said, holding up a photograph of Maria with a young man, both smiling and embracing. "This is Miguel Torres, her boyfriend, an artist too." Ethan took the photo, his eyes scanning every detail. "We need to talk to him. He might have seen something or someone." They headed to Miguel's studio, a small gallery in the city center. There, they found a man broken, his eyes red and swollen from crying. He looked at them with a mixture of pain and anger. "Ethan Blackwood," the detective said, showing his ID. "We need to talk about Maria." Miguel nodded, his body tense. She was everything to me. I don't understand why someone would do this to her. Did she have any problems with anyone? Someone who might have been jealous or angry?" Laura asked, her tone gentle but firm. Miguel shook his head. "She was adored by everyone. A talented, kind artist. I can't think of anyone who would want to hurt her." Ethan looked around the studio, his hands lightly touching one of Miguel's paintings. "What about you? Any disagreements with other artists? Competition can be a strong motive." Miguel hesitated, his eyes avoiding Ethan's penetrating gaze. "There's a group of underground artists, people who take art to the extreme. Some of them believe art should be shocking, even violent. But I never thought they would do something like this." Ethan and Laura exchanged glances. It seemed they had a new lead. "Who are these artists? Where can we find them?" Ethan pressed. "There's a bar in the lower part of the city called The Den. They meet there. It's a dark place," Miguel replied, his voice trembling slightly. Ethan nodded. "Thank you, Miguel. I'm sorry for your loss. We'll do everything we can to catch whoever did this." As they left the studio, Ethan felt the weight of the new information. The path was becoming clearer but also more dangerous. The artist wasn't just a killer. He was part of a world where art and madness intertwined in a deadly manner. Chapter 5: The Second Crime. The night was particularly cold when Ethan and Laura arrived at the Den, the underground bar where the city's darkest artists gathered. The dim lights and muffled jazz music created an oppressive atmosphere. The walls were covered with disturbing graffiti, and the air smelled of alcohol and despair. Ethan blended easily with the clientele, his keen eyes capturing every suspicious movement. Laura, a bit more nervous, stayed close to him, her eyes scanning the surroundings. They found a table in the corner, where they could observe without being noticed. As they analyzed the place, a waiter approached with an unexpected drink. "Compliments of the house," he said, before disappearing into the crowd. Ethan looked at the drink, then at Laura. Something was wrong. Before they could react, a scream cut through the air. The people around them froze, and the music stopped abruptly. In the center of the bar, illuminated by a single hanging lamp, was another body. The scene was horrific. The victim, a man this time, was hanging from the ceiling, wrapped in chains that held him in a macabre pose, like a bizarre puppet. "My God," Laura whispered. As Ethan quickly advanced to the scene, the bar patrons began to murmur. Some tried to leave, but the undercover officers were already blocking the exits. The body was covered in precise cuts, and a strange symbol was carved into the victim's chest. Ethan recognized the pattern. It was the same style as the artist. But this time there was something more. A piece of paper was pinned to the victim's chest, a note written in blood. "Do you want to see true art? Come find me where the light dies." Ethan read the words aloud, his mind working rapidly. The artist was challenging them, playing with them in a sick way. Laura looked at the note, her face pale. "He's calling us into a trap," she said. Yes, Ethan replied, his eyes fixed on the message. But we have no choice. We need to find out who he is before someone else dies. As the forensics team arrived, Ethan and Laura began interrogating the bar patrons. Most were in shock, but some provided valuable clues about the victim, an artist known for his provocative style and his feuds with others in the scene. It seemed the artist was escalating his game, choosing increasingly audacious targets. Ethan knew that time was running out. Every minute lost meant another chance for the artist to kill again. And he, the shadow detective, needed to stay one step ahead to put an end to this wave of terror. Chapter 6. The Cat and Mouse Game. The tension was palpable as Ethan and Laura left the den, the bloody notes still fresh in their minds. They knew the artist was watching, waiting for them to follow his trail. The rain fell harder, as if the city were trying to wash away its sins. Back at the office, Ethan spread all the evidence across his desk. Photographs, notes, reports, each piece of the puzzle the artist had left behind. Laura, beside him, examined a map of the city, trying to identify patterns in the crime locations. He's leading us, but to where? Laura asked, frustrated. Ethan lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his tired face. He wants us to think we're in control, but we're dancing to his tune. We need to find the pattern in his movements. As Laura drew lines between the crime scenes on the map, Ethan reviewed the profiles of suspects. There were artists with dark motivations, former colleagues of Maria and the second victim, but none seemed to fit perfectly. Suddenly, Laura stopped. Look at this, Ethan. The crime locations form a symbol when connected. It looks like a circle with a point in the center. Ethan examined the drawing. The point in the center. That must be the location of the next crime. Where the light dies. They grabbed the map and headed to the central point, an old abandoned theater on the outskirts of the city. The place was a decaying landmark, forgotten by time and society. Its wooden doors were rotting, and the broken windows let the rain in freely. Entering the theater, they were greeted by an eerie silence. The stage, once lit by spotlights, was now a shadow of its former self. In the center, a wooden chair was positioned under a single hanging lamp. Ethan and Laura advanced cautiously, each step echoing through the empty hall. The detective felt a chill run down his spine when he saw what was on the chair. A doll, dressed as a ballerina, with a black rose in its hand. The artist's signature. He's watching us, Ethan whispered. This is his cat and mouse game. Suddenly, the lamp began to flicker, and an old projector turned on, displaying a series of disturbing images on the wall. They were photographs of the victims, but also of Ethan and Laura, taken secretly during their investigation. Ethan, Laura said, pointing to an image of the detective in his office. He knows everything about us. Ethan's heart raced. They were closer to the artist than ever, but also more vulnerable. He sensed the killer's presence in the shadows, waiting to make his next move. We need to get out of here now, Ethan ordered, feeling the imminent danger. As they hurriedly exited the theater, Ethan knew the cat and mouse game was far from over. The artist was always one step ahead, but Ethan was determined to turn the tables. The hunt was just beginning. Chapter 7. The Crucial Discovery. It was late at night when Ethan and Laura returned to the office. The tension in the air was almost tangible, with fear and determination mingling in equal measure. Ethan knew they were close to something big, but he also sensed the imminent danger. They spent hours re-examining the evidence, trying to find the missing link. The abandoned theater, the photographs, the black roses, everything had a meaning, a message that still eluded them. Laura, with tired eyes, was flipping through Maria Sanchez's diary, which they had found in her apartment. "There's something here," she said, pointing to a specific page. She mentions a mentor, someone who introduced her to the world of dark art. Ethan leaned in, reading the scribbled words. The name mentioned was Victor Armand, a reclusive and eccentric artist known for his disturbing and controversial works. He had disappeared from the art scene a few years ago, but his influence seemed to persist. "Victor Armand," Ethan repeated, his mind working quickly. "He could be the key. We need to find him." Using his contacts, Ethan managed to locate an old residence of Armand, a decaying mansion on the outskirts of the city, shrouded in mystery and rumors. They decided they couldn't waste time and drove there immediately. The mansion was enveloped in an oppressive darkness, its outlines barely visible in the moonlight. The rusty gates creaked as Ethan pushed them open, and the path to the front door was covered in weeds and shadows. The place exuded an air of abandonment and madness. Entering, the smell of mold and decay enveloped them. The walls were covered with grotesque paintings, scenes of nightmares and torment. The floor creaked under their feet, and every shadow seemed to hide dark secrets. "We need to be quick," Ethan whispered. "He might be here." Exploring the mansion, they found a studio in the basement, full of unfinished sculptures and covered canvases. In the center, a large table was cluttered with documents and photos. Ethan and Laura began to sift through everything, searching for anything that connected Armand to the artist. Suddenly, Laura found a locked metal box. She pried the lid open, and inside was a collection of letters and photographs that revealed the connection between Armand and the victims. But what caught their attention the most was a diary, where Armand documented his masterpieces and mentioned an apprentice, someone he believed to be his true successor. "Ethan, look at this," Laura said, handing the diary to the detective. "He describes the crimes in precise detail, but the most important thing is that he talks about the next target." Ethan read quickly, his heart pounding. The artist was planning one final display, an event that would shock the city and cement his macabre legacy. "We have to act now," Ethan said, closing the diary firmly. "We know where he'll be. This is our chance to end this." They hurried out of the mansion, each carrying the weight of the revelation. The hunt was reaching its climax, and Ethan knew there could be no mistakes. The artist had to be stopped once and for all. Chapter 8: The Final Confrontation. The old abandoned warehouse, located in the industrial zone of the city, stood as a monument to decay. Ethan and Laura arrived at the location, fully aware that they were about to face the artist on his own turf. The night was cold and silent, the full moon faintly illuminating the building's facade. Ethan felt an electric tension in the air as they approached the entrance. He knew the artist had meticulously planned every detail for this moment. Pushing open the rusty doors, they entered a vast dark space, lit only by dim lights that created dancing shadows. In the center of the warehouse, a horrifying scene awaited them. A macabre installation, with several figures arranged in grotesque poses, all holding black roses. In the center, an improvised stage with a spotlight focused on an empty chair. It was as if the artist had created a gallery of his crimes, a final exhibition of his art. "He's here," Ethan murmured, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any movement. Suddenly, a low, sinister laugh echoed through the walls. The artist emerged from the shadows, his face obscured by a white theatrical mask. He clapped slowly, as if admiring his own work. "Bravo, detective. You arrived just in time for the grand finale," the artist said, his voice full of satisfaction. Ethan stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the man in front of him. "It's over, artist. You're surrounded. There's nowhere to run." The artist laughed again, his figure moving with a disturbing grace. "Run? No, detective. This is my stage, and the show is just beginning." With a swift motion, the artist turned on a series of lights, revealing more bodies suspended from the ceiling, all in artistic and macabre poses. Laura, shocked, drew her weapon, but Ethan raised his hand, indicating that they needed a different approach. "Why all this?" Ethan asked, trying to buy time. "Why turn lives into your twisted art?" The artist tilted his head, as if pondering the question. "Art is the ultimate expression of the soul, detective. And true art must provoke, shock, challenge. I create beauty in pain, immortalize suffering. You are mere spectators, unable to comprehend." As he spoke, Ethan noticed a slight tremor in the artist's hand. He was not invincible. There was a weakness there, a crack in the facade. Ethan needed to exploit it. "You're just a man trying to justify your own madness," Ethan said, his voice firm. "But it's over. You'll be remembered not as an artist, but as a monster." The artist took a step back, his confidence wavering. Before he could react, Laura fired, hitting his leg. He screamed in pain, collapsing to the ground as the mask slipped from his face, revealing an ordinary man, haunted by his own demons. Ethan rushed to him, handcuffing his hands. "It's over," he said, his tone definitive. As the artist was taken away by the police, Ethan and Laura stood watching the final scene of terror. The city could breathe a little easier, but the artist's scars would remain. Ethan lit a cigarette, looking at Laura. "Good work," he said, exhaling the smoke. Laura smiled slightly, relief mixed with exhaustion. "Is it really over?" Ethan looked up at the sky, the moon now obscured by clouds. "For now. But there are always more shadows to face." They walked out together, leaving behind the scene of the artist's final act, knowing that new battles awaited them in the city's shadows. Chapter 9: Resolution and Consequences. The sun began to rise, casting a soft glow over the still sleeping city. Ethan and Laura, exhausted but relieved, returned to the police station, where a team of officers anxiously awaited news. The artist was finally in custody, and the city could, for now, breathe more easily. Inside the office, the captain awaited them with a serious expression. "Good work, both of you. The city owes you a lot," he said, though the gratitude in his voice was tempered by the gravity of the case. Ethan nodded, removing his hat and rubbing his tired forehead. It was a team effort. Laura was crucial. Laura smiled, though the exhaustion was evident on her face. "It was teamwork, but we know this city always has its monsters." As the investigative team began analyzing the evidence and preparing the case against the artist, Ethan stepped aside, needing a moment of solitude. He walked outside, the morning breeze offering brief relief. Lighting a cigarette, he watched the first rays of sunlight filter through the narrow, grimy streets of the city. It was then he noticed a man standing at the corner, watching him. It was Miguel Torres, the boyfriend of the first victim, Maria Sanchez. He approached slowly, his eyes filled with pain and a desperate need for answers. "Ethan," Miguel said, his voice trembling, "is he Is he really in custody? Will he never hurt anyone again? Ethan nodded, exhaling a cloud of smoke. He's where he belongs. He'll pay for everything he did. Miguel looked at the ground, struggling against tears. Thank you. Thank you for bringing justice for Maria. Ethan placed a hand on Miguel's shoulder, a simple but meaningful gesture. I'm sorry for your loss. No justice will bring Maria back, but I hope this brings some peace. Miguel nodded, his expression a bit lighter. She always believed in you, you know? Said you were the only one who could face the demons of this city. Ethan sighed, the smoke dissipating in the cold morning air. The city is full of demons, Miguel. We just do our best to keep them at bay. As Miguel walked away, Ethan returned to the office, where Laura awaited him with a cup of coffee. We need to rest, she said, handing him the drink. Ethan smiled slightly. Rest? Something we rarely find in this line of work. Laura laughed, a rare but welcome sound. Then let's enjoy it while we can. They sat together, watching the city slowly wake up. Despite the victory, they knew new threats would always emerge from the shadows. But for now, they had triumphed over one of the worst monsters they had ever faced. Ethan looked at Laura, recognizing the youthful, determined spirit she brought to the job. You did great work, Laura. We need more people like you on the force. Laura smiled, a proud gleam in her eyes. I learned from the best, Ethan. As the sun rose on the horizon, the two detectives prepared for whatever came next, knowing that while they had won a battle, the war against the city's darkness was far from over. But together they were ready to face anything. Chapter 10: Reflection and Closure. The day was clear, and the city, although still marked by recent events, was beginning to return to its routine. Ethan's office was bathed in sunlight, a welcome change from the constant gloom and rain that seemed to follow him. He sat at his desk, reviewing the final reports on the artist's case, but his mind wandered. Laura entered, carrying a folder with the last documents. She sat across from Ethan, observing the detective who now seemed lost in thought. Everything's ready, she said, trying to catch his attention. The artist is being transferred to maximum security prison. The case is officially closed. Ethan nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the window, observing the city outside. You know, Laura, in all the time I've spent hunting monsters, I've never stopped wondering what really motivates them. What turns an ordinary man into such a twisted creature? Laura thought for a moment before responding. Maybe we'll never truly know. Maybe it's something born inside them or something the world puts there. But the important thing is, thanks to you, many of them are behind bars. Ethan smiled slightly, but the shadow of doubt still lingered. We did what we could, but there will always be more. New monsters, new shadows. Our work never ends. Laura stood up, picking up a framed photo from Ethan's desk. It was an old picture of a young woman with a radiant smile. Who is she? She asked. Ethan looked at the photo, a deep sadness in his eyes. She was my sister, lost to one of the monsters we swore to hunt. That's why I do what I do, Laura, so others don't lose the ones they love to the darkness. Laura placed the photo back on the desk, finally understanding the depth of Ethan's commitment. Then we keep going, because we have to, because you taught me never to give up. Ethan stood up, grabbing his hat and overcoat. Let's go, Laura. The city is calling us. There's always more work to be done. As the two left the office, Ethan took one last look at the city, feeling a strange sense of peace mixed with the certainty of what was to come. He knew the shadows never completely disappear, but he also knew there would always be those willing to face them. Together, Ethan and Laura walked through the bustling streets, ready for the next challenge. The city was alive, pulsing with untold stories, mysteries waiting to be uncovered. And as long as there were shadows, there would be the shadow detective, vigilant and relentless, always ready to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The sun shone brightly, but Ethan knew the darkness was never far away. He lit a cigarette, releasing the smoke in a long sigh. "Let's go, Laura. We have a city to take care of."